Parshas Vaera, Tavshin Pei Beis. We'll begin from the beginning of the Parsha, which is Perek Vav, chapter 6, Pasuk Beis, verse 2. Vayidaber Elokim El Moshe, and Elokim, which is a name of Hashem, which is a name for Hashem, spoke to Moshe. So we are referring to Hashem here as Elokim. Elokim, referring to Hashem, spoke to Moshe. Vayomer, and he said to him, Ani Hashem, I am God. This is a different name for God. This is the name spelt with a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey. A name that we don't pronounce it as it is spelled, but we pronounce it as if it would say the word Adnei. We say Adonai. And so Hashem, Elokim speaks to Moshe, and he says, I am Hashem. So the first thing that jumps out is, why the change of Hashem's name? When the narrative tells us Hashem is speaking to Moshe, it uses the name Elokim. And then when Hashem speaks, he says, Ani Hashem. So why the change in the names? And what exactly is Hashem saying to Moshe when he says, Ani Hashem, I am Hashem? So Rashi explains that this is a continuation from the end of last week's Parsha. At the end of last week's Parsha, Moshe and Aaron approach Paro for the first time, and the reaction is not a good one. Paro's reaction is to actually increase the slavery, to increase the labor. And they're not going to be supplied with straw anymore. They've got to find the straw themselves and still produce the same amount of bricks as they were producing until now. And that actually has increased the intensity and severity of the slavery manyfold. And at the end of last week's Parsha, Moshe turns to Hashem and said, why have you sent me? Basically, ever since I approached Paro, things have gotten worse and you haven't saved the Jewish people. So why'd you send me? And in last week's Parsha, Hashem responds, Ata Sira, now you'll see what I will do to Paro. And now in this week's Parsha, again, Hashem addresses Moshe, continuing from the end of last week's Parsha, where Moshe seemingly complained to Hashem, why did you send me? Since you've sent me, Paro has made things worse, and the Jewish people haven't been saved. So Rashi explains that the way to look at this first pasuk is, and Rashi addresses this issue, that we start with one name of Hashem and then go to another name of Hashem. So in order to understand Rashi's explanation, we have to understand what these different names of Hashem represent. What exactly does the name Elohim mean and represent? What does the name, what we'll just refer to as Hashem, which is Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, what does that name represent? So Elokim Elokim also can mean a judge. And whenever we refer to Hashem as Elokim, we are referring to the attribute of justice. The fact that Hashem is judge. The fact that Hashem is the judge of everything, and that he decides how judgment is going to be applied. And when we refer to Hashem as Elokim, as a judge, it means that he is judging us, and he is dealing with us according to what justice, what judgment obligates, which very often, when we are judged and we are found guilty and we are punished, that is when Hashem's name is Elokim. When Hashem is dealing strictly with the Jewish people, you will find the name Elokim. What does the name of Hashem address? So let's go to Rashi. So Rashi says that the reason why it says Elokim spoke to Moshe, Rashi says, Diber itoy mishpat, al shikshu ledaber v'loymar lama harei oisa lama zeh. Hashem is actually speaking to Moshe as Elokim, as a judge. It says Hashem spoke to Moshe with words of judgment, or in this context, it means words of rebuke. Moshe deserved rebuke for the fact that he said before, why have you done bad for this nation? And therefore, Hashem appears to Moshe as a judge. He is speaking to Moshe in a tone of rebuke because of the fact that he said because the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu said the words, "Why have you done bad with the Jewish people?" And therefore, for that, Hashem spoke to Moshe as Elohim, as a judge, as someone that's actually rebuking Moshe, judging Moshe and rebuking him, judging him and meting out the judgment of rebuking him for complaining the way that he complained. That's what the name Elohim represents. That Hashem spoke to Moshe as a judge, in a way of judgment, in a way of rebuke for doing something wrong. And that is for the fact that he complained the way he complained in last week's Parsha. That's the first part. Then, Vayemer Lav Ani Hashem, he said to him, Ani Hashem. Rashi explains that Ani Hashem in this context means that I am the God that can be believed to keep his promises. That's what it means, Ani Hashem. And Rashi shows from different places in the Torah that when we have those words that where it says Ani Hashem, we find more than once in the context where Hashem says that I can be trusted to reward those who I promise reward for doing what's right, and I can be trusted to punish those who do what's wrong, as I have said will be. So in this context, Ani Hashem, Hashem is saying to Moshe, I am Hashem. I will fulfill the promise I made to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov for the righteousness of giving their children the land of Israel, which as the Psukim continue, Pasuk Gimel continues, Vaera al Avraham el Yitzchak vel Yaakov, Bekel Shakai. Hashem says, I appeared to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov with the name Kel Shakai, which means the name that basically says that Hashem has the potential to do whatever he wants to do. Ushmi Hashem lo neidati lahem means that my name Hashem, meaning the name of Hashem that represents that Hashem fulfills his promise. In that way, I was not known to them because I made them the promises of the land, but it wasn't something, and the promises, I made a promise to them that the children will receive the land of Israel, and that they never saw. And then Hashem says, and I made a covenant with them to give the land to them and to their descendants. And now I have heard their cries, and now it's time for me to fulfill that promise that I made to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov to bring them to the land of Israel. Okay, so Rashi says that when Hashem says to Moshe, Ani Hashem, I am Hashem, Rashi says like this. Hashem says to Moshe, Neman l'shalem sachar tov l'mesalchim l'fanai. Ani Hashem means I can be trusted to pay reward to those who walked before me. I didn't send you in vain. I sent you in order to fulfill the words that I promised to the patriarchs. So Moshe says, so again, Hashem is addressing Moshe and saying to Moshe that I am trusted to pay the reward to those who go before me, and I haven't sent you in vain. I have sent you in order to fulfill my promises to the others. So it sounds like Moshe says, why'd you send me? And Hashem says, I didn't send you in vain. I sent you to fulfill the promise made to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But the problem is with that, is that Moshe's question, or Moshe's complaint was, why did you send me? Ever since you've sent me, things have gotten worse. So does Hashem address that when he says, I didn't send you in vain? Moshe is not asking. Moshe is asking. Moshe is complaining. Moshe is questioning. Why have you sent me if things have only gotten worse? Does Hashem respond to that? Does Hashem answer that? Hashem says, I haven't sent you in vain. You want to know why have I sent you? I haven't sent you in vain. That's not really addressing the question. And it could very well be that perhaps Hashem is not trying to address the question. Moshe Rabbeinu has his complaints. Moshe Rabbeinu is complaining to Hashem on behalf of the Jewish people. Why have you sent me? Since you've sent me, why have you done bad why have you done bad against the Jewish people? And Hashem says to Moshe, you know what? Trust me. Trust me. I didn't just send you in vain. You want to know why were you sent? Trust me. I didn't send you in vain. I sent you in order to fulfill my promise to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Perhaps that's what Rashi means to say. But I'm not so comfortable with that, because if the whole idea here is that Moshe Rabbeinu is questioning Hashem, he's questioning, like, what's going on? And again, he's doing it on behalf of the Jewish people. And if Hashem decides that he's not going to directly answer the question, he's just saying to Moshe, look, you have questions, but trust me. So then, that's all it should say. Why does Hashem have to say, I didn't send you in vain, I sent you to fulfill the promise of Yitzchak and Yaakov? This is not the first time that Hashem is saying to Moshe that he promised the land of Eretz Yisrael to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov's descendants, and that it's time to give it to them. This is not the first time this is being said to Moshe. And if the whole point to Moshe is to say, trust me, then that's it. Trust me. Neman, I'm trusted to pay. You know what? You want to know why you sent me? You're not in vain. I have my reasons. That's all it should say. Why do we have to also mention, I'm sending you, it's not in vain, I'm sending you to fulfill the promise I made. The point is just trust me. That's all it should say. So I'd like to explain it to you in the following way. And this is based on the writings of Rav David Feinstein, that's all. And he actually is not working with Rashi exactly. He has his own explanation as to the change. Why does it start with the name Elohim in the beginning and the name of Hashem in the end of the pasuk? And his explanation is based on the idea, as we said before, Elohim means Hashem's quality of judgment, of meting out justice, strict judgment. The name of Hashem, the name with the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, very often we find is a name of Hashem that represents Hashem's quality of mercy. You have Elohim, that means judge, and you have the name of Hashem, which means the God of mercy. And Hashem is basic, and the switch, and there's some kind of reason why the pasuk starts with the name Elohim, which means which represents the quality of Hashem's judgment. And then Hashem says to Moshe, I am Hashem, I am the God of mercy. So Rav Feinstein explained in the following way. We know that how many years when Hashem appeared to Abraham in the Bris Ben Abasarim, and he told to Abraham, your children shall be strangers and in a land that's not theirs, and enslaved in a land that's not theirs. How many years did he say it's going to take place, going to go for? How many years did he tell Abraham, your children will be strangers in a strange land and enslaved? How many years? 400. Were they 400 years in Egypt? No. 210. So the question that all the commentaries talk about, the commentaries of Midrashim, one of the biggest questions regarding the Exodus from Egypt is, well, if the number was supposed to be 400, they weren't there for 100. How do you calculate it? So there's a number of ways of looking at it. One way of looking at it is that actually they should have been enslaved for 400 years, and that's what should have been. But as we know, the Jewish people in Egypt fell and sunk into spiritual impurity to a point that they almost lost it. They almost sunk to the 50th level of impurity, which if you hit that level, if you hit that rock bottom, there's no coming back. And we have many of the commentaries of Midrashim talking about, why do we eat matzah? To remember that we were rushed out. Why were we rushed out? So the Malbim says we rushed out because any second more, if we had stayed any more, we would have dropped even further to impurity and never be able to get out. So Hashem rushed us out to make sure that we should be able to get out. Again, the Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt. Egypt was a very idolatrous society, a very depraved society, very impure society, and that impurity was taking over the Jewish people. The Jewish people did worship idols. We know that from many sources. And the Jewish people were sinking and sinking further and further. And Hashem understood 400 years of slavery, they're not going to last. So Hashem rushed them out. Now, he rushed them out when they were leaving Egypt, but he rushed them out even earlier than that. What did he do? He increased the slavery. Hashem intensified the slavery so that 400 years of slavery should be condensed into 210 years. So in essence, when Paro increased the slavery on the Jewish people, this is what allowed the 400 years to be condensed into 210 years so that they should be able to get out before it's too late. That's the approach that Rabbi Feinstein works with. And that's a very, 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 very famous approach. But the approach is an approach that says that the Jewish people couldn't last 400 years in Egypt. They couldn't last. They would have sunk into such a level of spiritual impurity that they would never get out. And they'd be lost. So Hashem had to get them out earlier. But in order to get them out earlier, they had to fill the decree, the heavenly decree of 400 years of slavery. The way they filled that quota was having their last years of work intensified to a level that it made up for all those years, made up for all those missing years. So in essence, the intensification of the slavery was a kindness to the Jewish people. It certainly didn't feel good, but it actually was for their benefit. It was the way that Hashem could fulfill his promise to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov to get them out of Egypt and to give them Eretz Yisrael and to give them the Torah and to become the chosen people. So therefore, says Rabbi Feinstein, the reason why the pasuk begins with the name Elokim, which means the quality of judgment, is because Moshe perceives Hashem as Elokim. Moshe looks at what's happening and he questions Hashem and he says, why are you doing bad with the Jewish people? So in Moshe's perception of what's going on, he sees Hashem as Elokim, the God who is meting out the quality of strict judgment. Hashem is not being merciful here. Hashem is being harsh. And there must be a reason why he's being harsh, but that means this is not the attribute of mercy. This is the attribute of strict judgment. And Hashem says to Moshe, Ani Hashem. Now, what you perceive here as strict judgment, that's not what it is. Ani Hashem, I am the Hashem of mercy. What's happening here is my mercy. What you perceive as my judgment is my mercy, because as we explained, the harshness of this slavery that has started now, which you perceive as something harsh, is actually mercy, because now that the slavery has been intensified, they don't have to stay there for 400 years. They can get out earlier, and by getting out earlier, they won't sink to the level of impurity that would now finish them off, that they should be able to leave. The slavery becomes worse, so that the Jewish people should be able to get out. So what you think is, I'm acting as Elokim, I'm acting as the God of strict judgment, I am not. Ani Hashem, I am Hashem, I am the God of mercy. And that's the switch. Based on this, we could now maybe say an explanation in Rashi. That when Rashi says that Hashem said to Moshe, Ani Hashem, again, it's not the exact same approach as Rav David Feinstein's. Or Rav David Feinstein is not working with Rashi's approach exactly. But the point of Ani Hashem, to say, I am trusted to fulfill my promise, and I haven't sent you in vain, I have sent you to fulfill the promise of the forefathers, that's the point. You're not going in vain. You're saying, why'd you send me? Everything has gotten worse. So in your eyes, you've been sent in vain. No, it's not in vain. It's in order for me to be able to fulfill my promise, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The whole reason things have gotten worse is so they should be able to get out earlier so that I can fulfill my promise. If you don't get out earlier, I won't be able to fulfill my promise. Perhaps that's what Rashi means. But as Rabbi David Feinstein continues, this is a very important subject in regard to life in general. The Talmud tells us, Kol ma da'avad Rachmana latav avad. Whatever Hashem does is for the good. Even things that we perceive as negative, and it's only natural for us to perceive them as negative because we feel them as negative, our emunah, our faith, teaches us that whatever Hashem does is for the good. There is nothing that Hashem is doing for us, even if it's difficult, that is not for our benefit. It is all Hashem's mercy. We perceive it as judgment. It is going to be judgment, but we have to understand it is Hashem's mercy. This is what Hashem is doing for our benefit. If God forbid a person hears very bad news, there's a bracha that's made, right? When a person loses a relative and they tear their garment, they make a bracha. Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, our God, King of the world, Dayan Emes, the judge of truth. We accept that Hashem's judgment is true. Hashem's judgment is just. It's an expression of our faith. But the Talmud says when you say that bracha, you should say it happily. You should say it happily. Even that blessing. You should say it. Now again, how do you do, it's clearly a pretty difficult thing to do. But essentially, a person who says that bracha And when he says the bracha of judge of truth, he's saying it's a judgment. That means he sees the judgment. It's something that he feels is judgment. But he also has to feel a certain level of joy as an expression of understanding that this is for my good. Because whatever Hashem is doing is for my good. And therefore, even that blessing should be said with joy. That is our lifelong challenge. That's our lifelong challenge of emunah, of our faith and trust in Hashem, that whatever Hashem is doing is for our good. And there are times when we merit to see it, and there are times where we don't. But eventually we get to understand why Hashem has done it. If it's not in this world, it's in the next world. If it's not before Mashiach comes, it's after Mashiach will come. Now, there's a Gemara in the Dorim. The Gemara in the Dorim cites a pasuk. It's a pasuk in Yeshaya, the book of Yeshaya. Oidcha Hashem ki anaftabi. I praise you, Hashem, for you have become angry with me. Yoshev apcha, your anger subsides, usinachamena, and you will comfort me. So what does it mean? I thank you, Hashem, for you have been angry at me. Really? You thank Hashem for being angry at you? So the Gemara gives an example. You had two people. They wanted to go out they wanted to sail on a ship to go to a land and do business. It was a chance to make money. When people were merchants, they had to sail. It was very dangerous to sail, but they used to sail by ship and go to places, make their money, and come back. So there was two people. Both of them planned on going on the ship for business. And one of them, the Gemara says, got a thorn in his shoe, a thorn in his foot. And he was wounded. He couldn't go. Hischa macharef megadef, which means, macharef megadef is a very harsh form. That means he was really complaining to Hashem. Why do you do this to me, God? Macharef megadef literally means to curse. He was really angry at God. Because look, why'd you do this to me? I needed to go and make a living, and this is what you do to me? Finish the story. Finish the story.
I know what they're doing.
Finish the story. All right, he couldn't go on the ship, and he was very upset he couldn't go on the ship.
Ship is gone.
And the Gemara says, Yamim, later on, he heard the ship sunk.
Ship was Titanic.
Well, the ship sunk. Okay? After you heard that, he started praising Hashem. And that's what it means. Yoshev apchas nachamenu. Your anger subsides and you comfort me. That means I thank you, Hashem, for angering me. At a certain point, at a certain point, I'll merit to be able to thank you for being angry at me. Thank you for doing that to me. Yeah, it was not an easy thing to go through. The fact that it hurt, there's a reason it had to hurt. But at the end of the day, that I was hurt here was for my benefit. And that is exactly what's happening here by the Jewish people when the slavery became more intense. Rabbi David Feinstein gives another example. 1940, right? Originally, Poland was divided by the Germans and the Russians. And anybody in Eastern Poland, when they heard the Russians were taking over, what did they do? If they could, they left. And where did they go? To Vilna. That's what my father did. Vilna was free. At one point, even though the Russians took over Poland, they left Lithuania free. And many people from Eastern Poland left Eastern Poland and went to Vilna. Why? Not from the Nazis. They didn't even know who the Nazis were. They heard about the Nazis. But they weren't running from the Nazis. They were running from the Russians because they knew how bad the Russians were to the Jews. So they were running from the Russians. And they went to Lithuania. And eventually Lithuania was taken over by the Russians. And people who could leave Vilna left. My father was able to leave Vilna. But there were people who weren't able to leave Vilna. And yeshiva students were the worst when it came to the Russians. And many of the yeshiva students that couldn't get out of Vilna and were stuck in Vilna when the Russians took over, many of them landed up where?
Siberia.
In Siberia. And when they were sent to Siberia, they said to themselves, this is horrible. Siberia. That's the worst place in the world to be. And what did they find out at the end? They were saved because of that. Because they were sent to Siberia, they didn't fall into the hands of the Nazis who annihilated everybody.
What happened with the metric wife? Exactly.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. She escaped from Poland to Russia. They arrested her, moved to Siberia.
And that's how she survived. Wow.
Well,
So I'm saying,
physically survived, but
okay, but
mentally not.
all right, but I'm saying there are other people that, they got through Siberia, eventually they got out, they came to America, they made families, and look, she made a family too, Baruch Hashem, right?
No,
She had a family.
No family, but at least she was.
What?
This we're talking about second wife.
Oh, okay. But at the end of the day, these people realized that what they saw originally as something as very difficult, not as Hashem's strict judgment, was really Hashem's mercy. And like I say, sometimes there are times we have the merit to be able to see that. The kind of story, the story of the Gemara, nowadays is the story about the person who missed the flight. He missed his flight. Then he found out that his flight crashed. Those stories have happened.
Yes,
those stories have happened. That's the contemporary story.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I want to conclude with another story, and I probably have said the story here before, but it's a beautiful illustration of this. All right. So you have a young man who was drafted to the Russian army, and this is before World War II. This is World War I time, a little bit before or after, I don't know exactly when. But he received a draft notice to the Russian army. No, you don't want to be in the Russian army. So if you had the ability, what would a father do for his son? The son would go for a medical examination. Everybody had to take a medical examination to see if they were fit, if they're healthy enough for the army. So you take your son to the doctor, you show him some money, and he writes a report that says, oh, this young man is way too weak for the army. They would bribe them and they would write a report to exempt them. So there was such a man who was going to do that for his son. And before they went for the medical examination, they stopped by the Chafetz Chaim for a blessing. They told the Chafetz Chaim the situation, and he was being drafted to the Russian army, and they're asking for a blessing that he should be able to get out. So the Chafetz Chaim very surprisingly responded to them. In Yiddish, it sounds a lot better. But he basically said to them, and what's so bad if he learns how to shoot a gun? That was his response. They asked him for a bracha. The Chafetz Chaim says, was hazeh schlecht? What's so bad if he learns how to shoot a gun? And they were shocked. And they asked him again, they explained them again the situation. They asked for a blessing for him to get out of the army. And the Chafetz Chaim just repeated again, was hazeh schlecht? What's so bad if he learns how to shoot a gun? Okay, they move on. They go into the doctor. Doctor does the exam. He knows about the money. And he's about to write the report. When the door opens up, in walks a Russian officer, a Russian army officer. Sees the young man, and he says, he looks good. I want him in my group. And he leaves. And the doctor says, this has never happened to me before. But I have no more choice now. I have to write him a letter that said he's fit for the army. And he ended up being drafted into the Russian army. And guess what? He learned how to shoot a gun. He learned how to shoot a gun very well. He became an expert marksman. And not only was he a sharpshooter, he knew how to fix guns very well. Years later, many years later, but years later, this young man and his friends are running from the Nazis. Yeah, during World War II, they run into the forest, and they want to join the partisans who are hiding in the forest and fighting the Nazis. And the partisans why would we want you Jews? And this young man says, because I know how to shoot a gun very well. I'm an expert marksman. And I know how to fix guns. And they laughed at him and said, prove it to us. And he did. He showed them what kind of a expert he was at both. And they said, okay, fine, we'll take you, but not your friends. And the young man said, it's all of us or nothing. And they took all three in. And this is how this young man and the two of his friends survived the war. That was what the Chavetz Chaim meant when he said, Was hazeh shlacht, what's so bad if he learns how to shoot a gun? That was the Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim, there are many, many anecdotes, many, many stories of his Ruach HaKodesh, which means a spirit of holiness that allowed him to see beyond what regular people see. And this is what he meant. But the same idea, right? It was such a tragedy, seemingly, that he was taken to the Russian army, which typically was a tragedy. And who knows what suffering this young man went through being in the army. But he also learned to shoot a gun, as the Chavetz Chaim said. And his ability to learn how to shoot a gun and become an expert with guns is what saved his life. And that was what the point here being made, according to that Hashem said to Moshe. Vayidaber Elokim el Moshe. Elokim spoke to Moshe. Moshe is perceiving God here as Elokim, the God of strict judgment. And Hashem says, Ani Hashem, I am the God of mercy. What's going on here is mercy. And that is a lesson in life. As I said before, is one of the most important ideas of our emun, of our faith, that whatever Hashem does, it may not be comfortable, it may hurt, and it's judgment, but it's mercy. Because whatever Hashem does is for our good. And whatever Hashem does is for our mercy. Sometimes we don't get to see it, and sometimes we do. But that's our faith. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for listening.
Okay. This is expressed